teacher's pet. It turned out that I spent the whole summer vacation talking to my teacher. I was never the kind of person who looked forward to summer break. Sure, I enjoyed the freedom, but the solitude wasn't exactly appealing. This year, though, I decided things would be different. I was determined to make friends, meet new people, and maybe even experience the kind of whirlwind summer romance I'd read about in countless books. Enter the dating app. I don't even remember how I convinced myself to download it. Maybe it was boredom or just the need to break out of my comfort zone. My heart raced as I set up my profile, carefully choosing a mix of candid and accidentally perfect photos. I even threw in a quirky bio. Bookworm by day, amateur baker by night. Swipe right if you can recommend a good thriller. It didn't take long for the matches to roll in. Most of them were unimpressive. A few, "Hey, what's up?" messages and one too many awkward pickup lines later, I was ready to delete the app. Then, I got a message from Alex. His first message wasn't anything special, but his profile caught my attention. His bio read, "Aspiring traveler stuck in suburbia. Let's talk dreams, books, and everything in between." It felt refreshingly real that I responded, and before I knew it, we were messaging nonstop. Over the next few weeks, our conversations ranged from our favorite authors to random debates about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Alex was charming, witty, and seemed to genuinely enjoy our late-night chats. There were times I even found myself blushing. He didn't push for anything inappropriate, but as we grew closer, the conversations naturally took a more personal turn. We shared secrets, dreams, and, yes, even some intimate moments. By July, Alex felt like the closest thing I'd had to a summer fling, even though we'd never met in person. But just as the summer was winding down, so was our connection. His replies became sparse, and eventually, he stopped responding altogether. I was hurt, but I chalked it up to another fleeting online relationship. School was just around the corner, and I had more pressing things to worry about, like who my new teachers would be. The first day of school brought with it the usual whirlwind of emotions. I had carefully picked out my outfit, hoping to strike the perfect balance between effortlessly cool and definitely not trying too hard. As I walked through the hallways, a mix of nerves and excitement buzzed in my chest. But then came the curveball. I slid into my first period class, English Lit, and immediately noticed him. Our new teacher. Young, tall, with a sharp jawline and an aura of quiet confidence that seemed almost unfair. His name was written neatly on the board, Mr. A. Carter. There was a ripple of whispered conversations among the students as he introduced himself. Apparently, he was fresh out of grad school and was taking over for Mrs. Walsh, who had retired last spring. I wasn't sure if it was the novelty of having a teacher who wasn't old enough to be our grandparent, or if it was just the way he carried himself, but within 5 minutes, half the class was smitten. I wasn't immune either. Something about his voice caught my attention. It was familiar, though I couldn't quite place it. His mannerisms, too, the way he paused before he spoke, the slight tilt of his head when he listened. It nagged at me, but I brushed it off. After all, I'd never met him before, right? Class went by in a blur. Mr. Carter jumped straight into an icebreaker activity, asking us to share our favorite books. When it was my turn, I mumbled, "Gone Girl," and he lit up. "Good choice," he said. A real page-turner, though that ending is polarizing. His comment stuck with me more than it should have. It wasn't until lunch that it hit me like a ton of bricks. My fork froze halfway to my mouth, and my heart started racing as I made the connection. Alex. No, it couldn't be. There was no way. But the voice, the way he smiled, even the name, it all clicked into place. Alex was Mr. Carter. My stomach drop. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, oscillating between disbelief and panic. How could this be happening? How had I not figured it out sooner? I ran through our summer conversations in my head, cringing at the thought of the personal details I'd shared. And the photos, oh God, the photos. I barely made it through the rest of my classes, and by the time the final bell rang, I felt like I'd run a marathon. I kept telling myself that it was just a bizarre coincidence, that there was no way he knew it was me, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. That night, sleep was out of the question. My mind replayed every text, every selfie, every little detail I had sent Alex, or rather, Mr. Carter. Had he figured it out yet? The rational part of me argued that he couldn't possibly know. My profile picture wasn't a full-face shot. It was one of those artsy, half-profile photos with good lighting. And while I had shared personal details, I never mentioned my school or my real name. Still, the paranoia was relentless. Every glance he gave me during class felt loaded. Every word he spoke felt like an inside joke I wasn't in on. The next morning, I resolved to act normal. If he didn't know, there was no reason to freak out. And if he did, well, I didn't want to give him any reason to confirm his suspicions. Walking into English Lit was like stepping onto a stage. My palms were sweaty as I sat in my usual spot near the middle of the room. Mr. Carter greeted everyone with his usual calm demeanor, but when his eyes briefly met mine, I swore they lingered for a second too long. "All right, class, let's get started," he said, breaking eye contact and turning to the board. I exhaled, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But the awkwardness didn't end there. As the weeks went on, there were little moments, subtle, but enough to make my heart race. Once, he called on me to read a passage, and as I stumbled over the words, he gave me a small, knowing smile. Another time, he asked me to stay back after class to discuss my essay. I braced myself, half expecting him to bring up the app or the photos. Instead, he simply offered feedback on my writing. Still, his tone was warm, almost too familiar. "Good work, but I think you can push yourself more," he said, handing back my paper. "You have potential, and I'd hate to see you hold back." I nodded, muttering a thanks, and bolted out of the room. Every interaction left me second-guessing myself. Was he being kind, or was this some kind of inside joke for him? Did he know? And if he did, why wasn't he saying anything? By the end of September, the stress was eating me alive. I avoided eye contact, kept my answers short, and prayed for time to speed up. Then came the ultimate humiliation. By October, the tension had become a permanent fixture in my life. My paranoia over whether Mr. Carter, Alex, knew who I was had reached its peak, and it didn't help that he was quickly becoming the unofficial heartthrob of the school. "He's so attractive," whispered Leah, the girl who sat behind me in class. Like, are all teachers this good-looking fresh out of grad school, or is he just an anomaly? I rolled my eyes and tried to focus on my notes, but I couldn't escape the chorus of giggles and hushed comments that always seemed to follow him. "He's single, right?" Leah pressed. "I mean, not that it matters, but still," I forced a laugh. "Pretty sure there's a rule about not dating your students." Leah leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial tone. "Yeah, but I feel like he's the weird around you. You've noticed, right? The way he looks at you." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said, shrugging. "It's like he's nicer to you. Or maybe more intense. I can't explain it, but it's definitely something." I laughed it off, but her words stayed with me. Was I imagining things, or had other people noticed too? From that point on, it felt like a spotlight was constantly on me. Every time Mr. Carter called on me in class or gave me feedback, I could feel Leah's gaze burning into the back of my head. One day, it came to a head during group work. We were split into teams to analyze a short story, and my group was busy debating the symbolism of a particular passage when Mr. Carter stopped by. "How's it going?" he asked, leaning slightly over my shoulder. "Good," I said quickly, keeping my eyes on my notebook. "Let me see," he said, gently taking the paper from my hands. He scanned it for a moment, then nodded. "Nice work, but think about how the setting might reflect the character's emotions. You're close, but I think you can dig deeper." As he handed the paper back, Leah smirked. "See," she whispered the moment he walked away. "See what?" I hissed. "That. He totally has a soft spot for you." "Stop," I whispered back, my face flushing. "You're reading into it." "Am I?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "It's like you're his favorite or something." Her comment lingered long after class ended. If she was noticing, how many others were? And worse, was it true? It was a Friday afternoon when the strangest and most mortifying moment of the semester happened. We were wrapping up class, and Mr. Carter was walking around the room collecting essays. As he approached my desk, my heart started pounding. I had perfected the art of keeping my head down and avoiding eye contact, but this time, it didn't save me. "Good luck on the essay competition," he said softly as he took my paper. I froze. "What competition?" Leah chimed in from behind me. "The one for extra credit," Mr. Carter replied smoothly. "I mentioned it last week. It's optional, but I think she's got a strong shot." Leah gave me a sly look. "You didn't tell me you were entering." "I'm not," I stammered, my voice barely audible. "Mr. Carter tilted his head, his lips curling into a faint smile. Well, you should consider it. You're a talented writer. I felt every pair of eyes in the room shift to me. My cheeks burned as I muttered a quick, "Thanks," before pretending to rifle through my bag. The bell rang, and I bolted for the door, ignoring Leah's teasing whispers. But it didn't end there. Later that day, I was in the library with a group of classmates, trying to focus on homework. Leah was flipping through her notes when she suddenly blurted out, "So, is he going to write you a recommendation letter for college, or what?" "Who?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Mr. Carter," she said, smirking. "Come on, it's obvious. The guy practically glows when he talks to you." "Leah, stop," I hissed. "No, seriously," she continued, leaning in. "He's like extra with you. It's kind of cute, actually." The others in our group chuckled, but one of the guys, Ethan, raised an eyebrow. "You think it's cute? It's weird. He's a teacher." "Relax," Leah said, rolling her eyes. "It's not like he's doing anything inappropriate." Ethan shrugged, but gave me a pointed look. "Still, you should be careful. People talk." I didn't respond, but his words made my stomach churn. People talk. The last thing I needed was anyone digging too deeply into why Mr. Carter might be acting differently toward me. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of it all pressed down on me. The photos, the texts, the late-night conversations, it felt like a ticking time bomb. I'd convinced myself he didn't know, but the way he interacted with me, the subtle familiarity in his tone, it was impossible to ignore. Was he waiting for me to slip up? Did he know and just enjoy watching me squirm? The thought sent shivers down my spine. The classroom was silent except for the occasional rustle of papers as Mr. Carter reviewed my essay. The sunlight streaming through the windows cast a warm glow on his desk, but I couldn't relax. Sitting across from him, I felt like I was under a magnifying glass, every inch of me laid bare for examination. He leaned forward slightly, the edge of his pen tapping against the desk as he made a note. His movements were deliberate, almost calculated, and his attention on my work felt too intense, too precise. "You've got potential," he said earlier, but it wasn't just the words. It was the way he said it, low and steady, like a secret only we shared. I stared at my essay, pretending to focus on the neat red marks scrawled in the margins. The room was too quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against your chest and made every breath feel conspicuous. Every so often, his arm would brush the edge of the desk as he leaned closer to show me something, the faintest whiff of cologne lingering in the air. I hated how hyper-aware I was of every small detail, his pen strokes, the way his lips pressed together as he read, the rhythm of his breathing, and the way his eyes lingered just a fraction too long when they met mine. It wasn't obvious enough to be inappropriate, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. "Confidence," he had said earlier, in a voice so even it felt like a performance. He wasn't wrong, confidence was something I struggled with. But sitting here, with him studying me so closely, I felt like every insecurity was written across my face. The hours stretched on, every minute loaded with attention I couldn't name. He never said anything out of line, never crossed a boundary, but there was something unspoken hanging between us. His feedback was thoughtful, his tone professional, but it was too much, like he was trying too hard to put me at ease. When he reached across the desk to slide a piece of paper toward me, his fingers brushed mine. It was barely a touch, fleeting and accidental, but it sent a jolt through me. I jerked my hand back, my face heating up, but he didn't seem to notice, or pretended not to. As the session wrapped up, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I packed my things quickly, eager to escape the suffocating stillness of the room. "Thank you for coming," he said as I reached the door, his voice softer than before. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of his gaze following me out. My heart raced as I walked down the corridor, replaying every moment in my head. The subtle touches, the lingering looks, the way his voice softened just for me. It was undeniable. He knew, and worse, I couldn't figure out if he wanted me to know he knew. By the time I got home, my thoughts were spiraling. I replayed every second of that tutoring session in my mind, dissecting his every word, every glance, every shift in his tone. The way he treated me wasn't outright inappropriate, but it was laced with something I couldn't ignore. He knew, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't going to keep it to himself. Monday came faster than I wanted, and as I walked into the classroom, I felt like every student's eyes were on me. They weren't, of course, but my paranoia painted the walls with accusations. I slid into my seat, careful not to meet his gaze, even as I felt it pass over me during roll call. Leah, always attuned to drama, leaned over during a lecture. "He's totally watching you," she whispered, smirking. "You're so his favorite." I shot her a glare, but it didn't matter. She wasn't the only one who had noticed. The whispers started soon after. It was subtle at first, a raised eyebrow here, a hushed laugh there. People began to make comments in the hallways, their voices dripping with innuendo. "He's always calling on her." Someone murmured as I walked past. "They're totally vibing." Another snickered. Each remark chipped away at the fragile bubble I had built around myself. I tried to act normal, to pretend I didn't hear, but the rumors were relentless. It wasn't until the next tutoring session that I hit my breaking point. The room felt smaller this time, the air heavier. I sat across from him again, trying to act indifferent as he went through my latest essay. But there was an edge to his tone, a tension that hadn't been there before. "You've improved," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "But I think there's still room to push yourself further." I nodded, gripping my pen tightly. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning my face. "Are you okay, Miss Parker?" I froze. The question was innocent enough, but the way he asked it felt too personal, too pointed. "I'm fine," I mumbled. Looking away, he paused, the silence stretching unbearably. "If there's anything you want to talk about, I'm fine," I repeated, more forcefully this time. I stood up abruptly, shoving my papers into my bag. "I have to go." His eyes followed me as I hurried to the door, but he didn't stop me. The next day, I skipped class, and the day after that, the third day, the whispers had reached a crescendo. People were speculating openly now, their voices no longer hushed. The rumors had grown wild. Some said we were secretly dating, others claimed they'd seen us together off school grounds. I sat in the bathroom stall during lunch, my head in my hands, willing the ground to swallow me whole. But the real blow came later that week when I overheard a conversation in the teacher's lounge. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was just walking past when I heard my name. "Miss Parker," a woman's voice said, laced with suspicion. "Have you noticed how much attention he gives her?" I didn't hear the reply, but it didn't matter. My stomach churned, and I bolted down the hallway, my mind racing. The walls were closing in. I couldn't escape the whispers, the stares, the weight of the truth hanging over my head, and then, just like that, he was gone. The following Monday, a substitute greeted us in English Lit. Mr. Carter had taken a leave of absence, she explained, but didn't elaborate. The class buzzed with speculation, but I stayed silent, my heart pounding in my chest. The rumors died down quickly after that. Without him there to feed the flames, people lost interest. Moving on to the next scandal, I never saw him again. For weeks, I waited for the other shoe to drop, for someone to come forward with the truth. But it never happened. Whether he left to protect himself or me, or both, I'll never know. Even now, I can't untangle the mess of emotions. Relief, shame, guilt, and something else, something darker that I don't like to admit. But one thing is certain, that summer and the person I thought I knew will haunt me for a long time.